I'm Danny Delaney. I work at ANCA, the Adirondack North Country Association. And we're really excited to be here and talking about this very, very nascent stage project. ANCA serves the 14 northernmost counties in New York, and we focus on growing a new economy in a number of different ways and perspectives and programs, some of which you can see here in small businesses, food systems, clean energy, and equity and inclusion through our work with the Adirondack Diversity Initiative, which we'll hear more about in a few minutes. Today is very informal. I know I'm sitting up here. I know that there's a big screen. It really is a conversation and a learning session, and this is the first one. We're going to have quite a few of them, some at night, some one-on-one if someone needs that, some hybrid webinar, not a webinar, whatever folks need to be able to come to the table. We're really excited. We know that there's a lot of local organizations doing amazing work in affordable housing already in our region. I know some of you are here and have started some really cool projects. And this is not necessarily ANCA's like bread and butter thing, right? We're not a housing agency, but we have been working with the Cooperative Development Institute for a number of years, specifically on business transition. So helping with the word lumber transition, getting the word out that cooperatives are an option for business ownership or home ownership, and that this is a model that we would like to see more growth in throughout our region. So thank you, especially for those of you who are here thinking about becoming an owner resident. You don't need to know that right now. That's okay. This is, again, learning conversation, really open-ended. But we're excited to learn and explore with you. And we I'm really excited to have our CDI team here in person. Okay, they're on the screen. But we've worked with them for, like I said, many years, and are excited to be starting sort of on this housing path. We know they provide a sustainable option for folks who are eager to own a home and maybe can't afford that in another way. And it's not the only option. There are lots of other things. And for some people, it's not the right option. Maybe you don't want to work cooperatively with a bunch of people to figure out your home situations. That's okay. Like, it's okay if it's not for you too, but if it is for you, we want to make sure that we're breaking down some of the barriers that would keep you from being able to realize that dream, and to introduce you to like-minded folks who might want to realize that dream with you. The process isn't about ANCA. It's not about CDI. It's about you and hopefully a steering committee that comes together that wants to develop a project right here. We have been so blessed and lucky to have a foundation give us, meaning this future entity that doesn't exist yet, that is you, some land in trust to be able to make a cooperative housing development on. And that's getting way into the details. So I will say that there's a wonderful prize at the end of the rainbow, which is there's some land to do this on in downtown Lake Placid, which is really exciting. And all of our thanks to those donors at the ANCA Foundation who are going to make that possible. Once a steering committee of future resident owners is formed, CDI will support the group in planning for a parcel of land right here in Lake Placid. And right after this session, anyone who said, yeah, I could picture myself working on this project. And if you didn't write that, or you didn't say that when you came in, you can say it on the way out. Or if you said I wanted to, and you're like, well, that's a lot of work, I don't want to do this anymore, that's okay too. Let us know on the way out, whatever your preference is. But for those of you who are interested in becoming prospective owner residents, we will be reaching back out to you to find out what some of the barriers are that you might have to coming to these kind of meetings. What is it a time of day? Do you need transportation? Do you need childcare? Do you need food? We're not asking you that today, but if you decide to get on the steering committee, we'll be reaching out to each of you to see what it is you need to be able to show up regularly in your lives and to make this something that you can commit to. You don't need to commit to it right away. It said commit to, don't get scared, just learn with us for a while and see what's right for you. So we hope this effort will serve as a model for other North Country projects in the future, empowering future owner residents and expanding ANCA and CDI's capacity to provide leadership for the region's cooperative housing sector, which is emerging. And we're really excited to be doing this work. I said that 15 times, but I really mean it. We're really excited. And we would love, in some beautiful blue sky situation across the region, we would have more business-owned or worker cooperatives that are businesses. We'd have some resident-owned and commercial use mixed properties. We'd have some things going on where there are just more co-ops and more types of co-ops. And we're excited to be working on this today. And we're also really excited to be doing it with the support of the Adirondack Diversity Initiative. to ensure that we're providing a welcoming and inclusive process for all of us as we develop the steering committee. And I say we, but as you develop the steering committee with the people that you want to develop the steering committee with. And so I just want to sort of give a hat tip and introduce Nikki Holton-Patterson from the Adirondack Diversity Initiative to speak a little more about the Adirondack Diversity Initiative's commitment to this project and why it's important to her.
Hi, thank you, Danny. I'm right here, everybody. How are you doing? I'm Nikki Holton-Patterson. I'm the director for the Adirondack Diversity Initiative at Adirondack North Country Association. I'm speaking on top of most people. I don't want to do that. But there we go. So that my back isn't turned to everybody, right? Yes, I know from my theater days, right? But ADI, housing justice is social justice. It's about equity. And so we are here to work with you to make sure that this process is equitable and that it doesn't turn into another space where people who cannot afford housing, because this is really the essence of what's going on. It's tapping into working people, right? Giving working people the option of home ownership in a cooperative way that they would not be able to afford, will not be able to even think of themselves in part of. And so what's really important to ADI is to make sure that this process is about designing a new future of ownership that reflects the new economy that we're trying to make sure works for everyone. An interesting point about cooperatives is that it's grounded and rooted, its history is rooted in Black and Indigenous communities. I'm Jamaican, and I'm from a village community where I remember being raised by 4 or 5 people who I wasn't related to, right? And maybe some of you remember that kind of communal living, that kind of communal operating, how communities have come together out of necessity, right? And this is another necessity that we need. The North Country is not the only place that's struggling with housing equity, right? And we're coming together to make that a realization. And ADI is here to work with you to make sure that it is equitable in every step of the way. Okay, so thank you for having us as a partner. Thank you for ANCA for doing this. Thank you to our donors. This is philanthropy needing equity, right? And so we're thankful to our donors. So thank you for being here, and I expect to see more of you in the coming for our future sessions. Thank you.
So with great pleasure, I would like you to introduce our team from the Cooperative Development Institute. We are just so blessed to work with. And Catherine, I will let you or Margaret or Chris decide who introduces themselves first.
Great. Thank you so much, Jenny, and welcome to you all. It's an exciting moment for me to be broadcast into a setting like this. It's kind of a kick, and thrilled that we can do it. My name is Margaret Miley, and I'm with CDI. I'm here with my colleagues, Catherine Bessie, who will be co-presenting with me today, and also Chris Lepre, who has joined us from, well, I'll let you introduce yourselves. Chris, would you like to start?
Sure thing. Yeah, I'm Chris. I'm joining you guys from Brooklyn, New York, actually. And I am an assistant project manager at CDI. Just started actually this summer. So very excited, particularly in this space with housing. It's a really, really promising field for cooperatives. And so just happy to be here and support.
Catherine?
Thanks, Chris. I'm Catherine Bessie. I'm a director of business services at the Cooperative Development Institute, CDI, and I focus on the three-legged stool of childcare, worker-owned enterprise, and affordable housing as basic human necessities in our cooperative development work. And it's a thrill for me to join you today in your wonderful auditorium. And I'm really happy to see so many prospective members and contributors at the table. So welcome, and super happy to be here with you all today.
Great. And I'm Margaret Miley, Special Projects Director. I think I have a title like that. And I'm beaming in from just outside of Boston. Catherine didn't mention she was from Maine, so we have a lot of area covered here. And I have a focus on small business and housing with a long career in community organizing and local design. So this project sits in all of our sweet spots, and we're very excited about it. So today, we're going to talk about the opportunity as Danny described, but I wanted to also introduce the CDI. Cooperative Development Institute is a nonprofit. We're 26 years old. We're a virtual organization before virtual was cool. And we have offices in Maynard, Mass. And we serve New England and upstate New York. We have about 28 employees, and we live all over the region, about a $3 million budget. And what we do is training, technical assistance, research, and promotion of every kind of cooperative. So it could be startups, it could be transitioned into employee ownership, or building from the ground up a cooperative housing project. We have a strong equity and inclusion mission. And so again, this is a perfect project for us. Some of the ways we cultivate, some of the sectors we cultivate cooperatives in are, as I mentioned, worker buyouts like Ward Lumber in your area. Housing, we do a lot of work in resident buyouts of manufactured housing communities. We also do food systems work, everything from seeds to compost, as we say. So we're busy and we're excited to work in your area, and especially to work with ANCA, who has been a wonderful partner. So today we're going to talk about this opportunity, this amazing parcel of land, 103 acres, and what could be done with it. As part of that, we're going to describe some key cooperative concepts. What is residential ownership? How does it work? And then we're going to talk about examples of housing cooperatives and outline the possibilities and the process.
Great.
Catherine?
So to get us started, we thought we'd just start with some basic building blocks here. What exactly is a cooperative? So all cooperatives, whether it's housing or business, will share sort of some baseline pieces, which is that a cooperative is a group of people who come together to share in ownership of something. So 3 or more make a co-op. It's also a group that uses democratic governance to make decisions. So it's an inclusive process. Everybody gets a voice. Everybody has the ability to influence. And it's all about meeting the needs of the membership. So a co-op is a membership-based enterprise that is focused on meeting member needs and long-term control by membership. So it's all about the members really having that autonomy and control that is needed to really own and operate something collectively. Some other important pieces are that when we say members, we mean owners, right? So you can be a member of a nonprofit organization. This is a different kind of membership. A membership of a cooperative enterprise is being an owner of that enterprise, really sharing in the ownership, but being one of many owners, usually. And owners are always users directly involved with the activity of that enterprise. In this case, residents of the housing. If it's a business, it could be the workers of the business or the consumers of the service or product. So you might know of many co-ops out there in the world that you've heard of before, and there's probably many more that you may never have heard about. And again, it's all about for the members, by the members, democratic approach to owning and operating enterprise or property management, etc. Another important thing to take away is that when we talk about a member owner of a co-op, each member owner gets one and only one of the following: one and only one ownership share. So you can't have more shares and more power. You only have one share and one vote. So only one vote while owning your share. And one and only one electable seat to the board. So this is your ability to become part of the overall leadership. That usually is not everybody. If you're a large scale co-op, it's, you know, an elected body that takes on and is delegated specific roles and responsibilities by the rest of the membership. And so that sort of gets into the governance pieces, which we'll do a much deeper dive into in learning group session 2. But I think these are some really important just baseline pieces for understanding what a co-op is. And then last, we often talk about what are called the 7 cooperative principles. We're talking about social profit enterprises here, and we need to make sure that co-ops are really following these principles to stay part of what we think of as the cooperative network, the cooperative ecosystem, which is that membership is open and voluntary. If you are participating in a way that other members are, you should have access to becoming a member. Also democratic control, again, voting, electing, making decisions collectively. Economic participation, that gets to that membership share, some sort of contribution, even if it's minimal. We don't want barriers to entry in how we structure cooperatives, and we do want economic investment of some kind for membership. Autonomy and independence. So this means, not becoming part of some conglomerate, big business enterprise or something like that, staying for the community, staying for the membership, and making sure to keep that as the forward facing goal. Also, a value of education and training. Co-ops are a great place to form an education hub to make sure that members are getting other needs met as well, such as continuous learning and growth opportunities, particularly around how to function really well as a co-op. And then cooperation with other co-ops. So becoming part of a cooperative economic structure that co-ops are supporting each other and really empowering the cooperative momentum in the community, as well as, last but not least, concern for community. So definitely prioritizing the needs of the membership and also supporting interest and valuing community support as a core value, a core principle of cooperatives. And I'll pass it back to Margaret to explain why we're here today, what the opportunity is that we're looking at.
Great, thank you. So yeah, from the visionary and the dream of cooperation down to the local opportunity. As Danny mentioned, there's been a donation of land of 103 acres, which is kind of amazing. And in my life, unprecedented. I'm sure it goes on in other places, but there is a vision of a residential co-op on this land, which is meant to address affordable housing needs, equity and inclusion goals, as well as a land conservation requirement. So let's take a look at this piece of property. It is, well, you got the address earlier. The Chubb River passes through the parcel. So there's a potential for recreation, river and biking development. There's also a requirement that a fair amount of the parcel be untouched and kept in conservation. So on the next slide, you can see those areas which are mostly in yellow. And you can see the Chubb River and related wetlands in blue, which do not allow for much building. On the right, you see in brown that there are some areas designated as hamlet, which is suitable, some of it suitable for denser building. So that's a quick overview of the layout of this place. A number of entities and individuals have taken a look at this and the general opportunity and are very interested in also assisting this project. So those include the Adirondack Park Agency, also known as AKA, some MIT architecture students who will be helping us on this, a tiny house consultant, Paul Smith College students, town officials, and others. And we are welcoming more partners and interested parties to help us think about this. Again, we're assisting with it, and we don't want to lead the process. So Catherine will talk about some cooperative options.
Great. Yes. And so the partnership web is very important, but at the heart and soul of this learning group process are those prospective resident owners who are really, who we're really trying to speak to and reach with our efforts today to truly get to, okay, who may live in what gets built here and really be part of that leadership and guidance for the project. So in order to really set that up, we want to make sure that these learning group sessions share widely the tools that you all will have at your fingertips with our guidance and support through this process. And you may be surprised at how many ways a housing cooperative can actually come together. So we want to do a quick landscape sort of assessment for you to show you what the different kinds of starting places are for these kinds of co-ops, so that you have those tools in the tool belt for use later on. So we have what's called the permanent real estate cooperative, and we'll dig into some examples of each of these models, which is often, a larger scale, multi-building, investment-based co-op. Then we also have our housing and land-based co-ops that can be a little bit more tailorable, but they're still a cooperative enterprise that's owning the entire project. And they can be custom built pretty easily. Then we have our limited equity housing co-ops that are more of a rental-based model, really focused on well below market rate rent for long periods of time. And then we also have our cooperatively operating nonprofit trust-based housing models, and many more. So we'll start today by just going through some of the nuts and bolts of what these are to share with you some of this knowledge. And the first guiding questions we really have when talking about residential ownership and residential cooperatives is, which entity or individuals is actually owning the land itself? We start separating the land off from the buildings. Who's owning those buildings, dwellings, shared infrastructure, and so on. And basically the question of what really gets shared by the whole and the co-op and what is still individually owned and empowered in that way. So in general, a housing or a land-based cooperative is a cooperative corporation. So it's an entity that gets built that is owned and managed by those member owners. And it in turn owns the real estate. So it's a land without landlords framework. The co-op becomes the landlord and the residents collectively play the role of that landlord. So being a residential member owner is being one of the owners of the co-op that supports the property management, the democratic management of the property, and sometimes also works together to hire additional staff needs for the property management of the parcel and the build. In addition, it's important to be aware that there can still be in these co-ops long-term lease agreements and other memorandums that support residents in having very clear established relationships for any sort of dwelling you might live in, whether it's an apartment, a duplex, a tiny house, and it doesn't undermine that ownership piece to have that lease agreement. And so when you hear us talking about resident-owned structures and, you know, the fact that there's still sort of a tenant and lease arrangement, just bear in mind that it's a tenant and lease arrangement with, as a resident, with essentially yourself and the large body of government that you're part of that manages the whole thing. And that gets us to the democratic control piece. So being part of that governing body means that you're one of the folks who can make baseline decisions for certain kinds of decisions that need to be made, but also elect your comrades to a seat of leadership, which could become you, and cycle in and out of different members of the cooperative over time. Again, focusing on this democratic control and the voting structures of governing. And land-based co-ops can also build a lot of individual wealth. There's opportunities for different kinds of co-ops to, support the sort of generational wealth building, investment into your own property on the land, whether it's tiny houses or manufactured housing, like Margaret was talking about earlier, or resident-owned community buyouts, for example, where the building might be a little bit separate from the land itself. These are important concepts to bear in mind as well. And we will do a deeper dive into governance in our learning group session too, because it's a really important piece of co-ops, but we just wanted to show you a general outline of governance structures. Each co-op can be a little bit different. Just to share, this is sort of part of what we do with real projects. We always talk about how the residential member owners structure both their governance in terms of their governing body, and also the way that that governing body then supports the overall management. And we train groups on being clear with roles, responsibilities, and this is a sample from some of our governance trainings. So let's start with digging a little bit deeper into that permanent real estate housing cooperative, or what is often called the PREC model, P-R-E-C. This is when a co-op forms, a permanent real estate co-op that owns the buildings, buys buildings, builds new buildings, owns the land as well, and really builds out a collectively owned and operated real estate portfolio. Oftentimes PRECs are also centered around a fund, an investment fund to include outside investors. They often own multiple properties, and they focus on the ability to build equity, similar to like mortgages, and the concept behind, paying up front to really stop paying down the road, and building that generational wealth in doing so. So really ending up with shared but also individually assigned assets. And here is a fun diagram that sort of sums it up. This is the East Bay Permanent Real Estate. So this is in the San Francisco Bay Area. It's quite a large permanent real estate cooperative that spans multiple land properties, multiple buildings, non-adjacent buildings as well. And what the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative does is focuses first on the people of the community who actually are the tenants of the properties, and do sort of pay the rent. It's sort of like pay the mortgage, essentially, live in and co-manage those properties. And they do this by owning collectively the purple bubble here, which is the co-op itself. that is the enterprise that actually purchases and manages these properties on behalf of the owners, who are the people. And those properties build equity for the tenants and also return investments and profits to the resident owners as a body. So that's the PREC model. Keep that in mind. These models can get very custom fit and tailorable, as we see with cooperative land-based, when there's larger pieces of land involved. We're looking at land tenure projects, projects that are both enacting some kind of cooperative housing and also some sort of a commons. We have a great example from the Soul Fire Farm Cooperative that has spent a lot of time supporting CDI with understanding the unique strategic models that have been developed around land access and land stewardship. And in this case, a cooperative is formed that owns the property, but the property is zoned out into sort of residential zones and community zones. As you can see in this map, the purple areas are the residential zones, and they're actually subdivided portions of the parcel. And the the pink areas are the residential zones. The yellow area is the large commons that is mutually supported place where residents can do business. They have a nonprofit that is also established and accessing those commons and supporting some resources in getting there. And this sort of like boils down to sort of this idea that the residents have access to commons, the residents have access to their own individual plots and parcels as well to invest their own resources and maybe building tiny homes or other kinds of dwellings. And the residents also elect and are represented by a board that then oversees the entire property, that it's meeting the needs of the membership. And so that just gives you some ideas about how more of a multi-stakeholder approach can work with land-based co-ops, where there could be residents, but also businesses and nonprofits sharing in the commons in different and unique ways, just to evidence the fact that we can really customize and tailor these models as needed. And this is an example from New York State. And I'll pass it over to Margaret to talk about limited equity.
Great. Yeah, and another one for the list that is a model that has been used for 50 years in the United States, fairly common in urban areas, is a limited equity housing cooperative. This has as its focus affordability as a high priority. So residents buy in low, they have long-term affordable housing. They don't have much profit-making potential as single-family homeowners may. The resale of the price of membership is limited, and often there's a public subsidy involved, and so their income guidelines, either imposed by the mutual arrangement by the co-op or by requirement from public entities that might be contributing because they're interested in stable and affordable housing in certain communities. So it's a strong model. It's a fairly mature model. It has its pluses and minuses, as you can probably see. A couple of examples are in Maine. CDI helped develop the Raise Up Cooperative. And this is a multi-family, multi-building, as they call in real estate, scattered site property. They're buying more buildings, and they're at 30% below market rents in their carrying costs for residents. Another example, well, many examples are in Boston. CDI just finished a research project to do an assessment of the condition, and by that we don't mean physical condition, we mean organizational condition of limited equity cooperatives in Boston. We researched over 60 of them. We talked to professionals, we talked to boards of directors, and we again affirmed that this model, again, probably 30, 40 years old for many of these co-ops, is viable and has had positive community impact beyond just the housing. So that's one model to consider as well. Catherine?
And it's also worth talking about the community land trust approach, which is not your typical land trust, but maybe a kind of a trust that you've heard of before. And this is an approach where it's actually a nonprofit owner of the property. So the community land trust is a trust specifically set up to behave like a co-op. So this is not technically a cooperative corporation, it's a nonprofit enterprise. However, it functions very much like a cooperative, and we see it as having some real benefit in this approach because it dissolves the development value of the property itself permanently, which is a huge relief when it comes to taxes and the appraised values. And so just to dig in a little bit, what a community land trust does is it offers the homeowners the ability to still own the assets, or the homes, the dwellings on the property are actually owned by the individuals, and the trust owns the land underfoot. And so the yurt might be mine, but the ground that the yurt is on belongs to everyone who lives there. And this dissolving the development value is really important in some cases as well when thinking about those long-term costs associated with that value of the land, and also the sentiment of wanting to sort of move away from a land ownership paradigm in some cases. This is also a good opportunity for affordability and privacy to be permanently maintained by the nonprofit trust. And some examples of this are out here in Maine, we have the Land in Common, which is a community land trust that's supporting multiple families, also with farming activities. So some business enterprise taking place on the land as well. So there's some interesting applications there for the shared land, as well as in pretty large scale, the Proud Ground project, which is out in Oregon. And this is a HUD approved nonprofit that uses the community trust model to really provide large scale affordable home ownership for over 400 different homeowners at this time. And so it's really, we're talking about scale. So in this case, again, it's you still own the house, you still might have a mortgage with the bank, you are building equity in much deeper ways than the limited equity model provides, but you're also paying more upfront, and there's tax benefits, and also quite a bit of privacy for your own dwelling. So it's worth mentioning. It's a creative alternative to a cooperative enterprise. All right, so we just threw a lot of information your way, and we want to make sure that people have a chance to share your thoughts and feedback. So we'd like to open up for any questions or discussion around, based on what we've gone over thus far, what is really standing out to you? So in thinking about the sort of goals and strategies of building a lot of community housing, because there's a great need in your area, growing community and strategies to grow community, being able to live and work in Lake Placid in, as we sort of were talking about earlier in the meeting, some, considerations having to do with a tourism-based economy and some challenges there with actually being able to live in the Lake Placid community. The ownership piece, cooperative ownership and community control and management, the ability to get below market rent, multifamily buildings as compared with maybe individual dwellings or both, and the idea of a commons or the integration of business and farming and other enterprise. So yeah, we'd love to open it up and hear from you a little bit about what is standing out to you. So we welcome anyone to share.
And before we jump into the whole, can I just make one very quick clarifying point? Is that okay?
Yes, please.
So we did list some folks who we've talked to already, so like the Adirondack Park Agency, APA, and the Paul Smith College and some other folks, and they're excited to help us with this project, but it's not like there's a formal commitment to do anything in particular. I just want to make sure that we're laying the groundwork to say, like, we're really excited to have these folks as partners and on board in our network, but we didn't want to sort of make it sound like it was more than it was at this point in the process. So.
Thank you for the clarification. Very helpful.
Great. So questions from the crowd. What's standing out?
I have a question. Very new to all these concepts and the variations of the legal types of co-ops. So I'm wondering if there's a format that allows for an individual to own their property and get it at the affordable rent rate and be able to stay there long term, as well as a model that recognizes seasonal people that may come and go, that don't really need the ownership, but they need the low rent to have a place to work seasonally.
Yes, absolutely. That is an excellent question. And all of the models that we looked at could adapt into that feature. As we talked about before, there's voluntary membership. So just because you live there does not mean you have to become a member. For instance, in a limited equity model, you could have sort of like a membership pathway, but not have to commit to it. So you could be a tenant of the property that's being managed by the co-op, and not commit to the membership and not be part of the decision making or invest with your own equity in any way. And so that is fairly common to see those hybrid models. And what happens is that the rent that is paid is still affordable and becomes a revenue stream for the rest of the co-op to manage that property. And that happens in the limited equity, in the permanent real estate model, and in all kinds of other creative models, such as the soul fire farm example.
Yes, and I would just add, I was just talking this morning to a member owner of a Boston limited equity housing cooperative, and they own the building. There's 15 units and 2 are rentals. They just rent it out. They also have commercial units on the first floor that they rent out. So the cooperative owners own the whole building, but there are a couple of standard rental tenants, and they have made the commitment for the residential tenants that those units will be affordable. So lots of examples out there of that.
And I'll just add as well that lease agreements for these kinds of co-ops are often 99 years. And so when we talk about, like, once you become a member, the only thing that could remove you from membership, from long-term membership, would be your own intention to leave, which is also very possible in these models. You're not stuck into residency. You're just, while you are a resident, you can choose to also be an owner and contribute in the decision-making and the community control and the equity building that comes with that. Great question. Any other questions, thoughts? Anything standing out to you in the audience today?
In this wonderful idea of the project in the Lake Placid area, since there are no buildings on the property to begin with, who is responsible for the building of those places, and how is that decided and carried out?
Yeah, another great question. So we'll get to in a minute here the discussion around what it means to form as a steering committee. But I can jump ahead a little bit to answer the question and just say The learning group will hopefully become a steering committee of prospective member owners, future residents. And the residents will have the opportunity to decide exactly what this needs to be to meet those member needs. And from there, that steering committee will essentially become the founding board of the cooperative enterprise and walk with us through the process of building a financial pro forma, understanding what the build needs to be, what the community wants to invest in terms of new build for the land. It might be individual investments. It might be a co-op that purchases a build out of a multifamily residency complex and a mixture of both. So I think it could go in any direction. And I think that we do want to keep in mind the ultimate goal of creating as much affordable housing as possible with this opportunity. The design is something that we have some architecture students, master's level students from MIT lined up to support the visioning of this winter when we get to that point, hopefully, with a committed group of steering committee members who can help us really make this community owned.
I'd love to springboard off that point because, and just full disclosure, I work for ANCA and have for 8 years with all these wonderful people and have met you guys virtually, but I also live in Lake Placid and I'm a renter and would love to be involved in this project. And your question is what sort of makes me very nervous about this concept because I have no experience with that. But at the same time, looking at your list here, it's really all of the above. All of the above, because I think as we see that more and more short-term rentals coming in, creating fewer opportunities, I wanted to be a lifelong renter, but who knew that renting was going to go away is a thing, but it did recently here. So, and so that community is eroded because of that situation. So, so I say yes to all of these. I love the idea of business and farming, but it really is, for me personally, I want to stay in Lake Placid. I love to be part of this community. I'm scared to death of the idea of developing a 100-acre parcel of land, but we need a lot of community housing. And so I'm excited to be here and learn, but for those, yeah, all of the above. And I love the businesses and farming, but really I think that's sort of ancillary to the others, for me personally.
I'm actually familiar with this parcel. There's some bank trips that currently go through it. It would be a nightmare to farm. There would be a lot of work to provide agricultural land out of this. But my question was, and I think you kind of answered it, but it seems like the term tiny house keeps coming out over and over again as an example. That is not, we're not looking to do solely tiny houses here. We're going to, I'm assuming the steering committee would be in charge of what kind of housing is built, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So there may end up being some sort of spaces set aside for, manufactured housing or tiny housing or anything like that. But I think the heart and soul of the project is about creating a lot of community housing. And so that might not be the best way to build a lot of community housing. That being said, I think there is an opportunity to take an integrated approach. So consider multiple kinds of builds, and it'll be, financial pro forma permitting at the end of the day. So it'll be based on an assessment of what is needed, the construction costs and the actual developers involved at the table. And, we're looking at a ways down the road before getting there. I think the first step is forming the group of resident owners to be that foundational board, that decision-making body to support making these sound decisions for and by the community of residents. And then, figure out how do we check all these boxes and develop and design something that's truly going to meet those membership needs long-term. So although, we've talked about tiny houses, and we've talked about manufactured housing, and we've talked about multifamily, complexes and all of the above are pieces on the table. But I wouldn't sort of limit ourselves to just one scope at this point. But great question.
Is there a threshold, a minimum number of units or families or people that is required to begin the project?
That's great.
Or what's the target, for the population?
I think for a steering committee size, we're really looking at 7 to 12 individuals is a sweet spot. Any more than 12 is also great, but if we can get between 7 and 12 steering committee members truly representing the needs of the community and holding that on behalf of the community, we'll be in really good shape to take this through, design the project, and get it to a place where we're recruiting additional residents. Now, there is a huge need in the area. I mean, we're looking at over 1,000 affordable units as a goal for the entire community to be developed. And so we'll do our best to support a steering committee in figuring out how to optimize and maximize this towards that goal.
Just to be clear, the vision is not for 1,000 units on this property. That was an area need,
Yes.
right? Okay. And so I would imagine it's the number of units ends up being a reflection of what the land can support, what the steering committee's vision is, and the finances. So it's very much up in the air at this point.
What is the acreage set aside for the housing specifically?
15 to 20 acres available for development, and the rest is in forest. And the trust that's donating the property would prefer not to remove any of the forested area.
And there's a little land along the river that they suggested could be developed as a business, recreation area. But it's unbuildable in terms of housing. So that's.
So I know when this concept was first being discussed at ANCA last year, 2 months ago, I did a little digging just as research, and sort of depending on APA, and I'm not really sure how the hamlets versus the APA, and there's this overlay of requirements, but it was sort of the 40 to 60 units are maybe allowed based on further investigation and approval by all the people who need to approve things. And we have a town board member here. I don't know if you know more about that. Or about the number of units that might be allowed, how familiar you are with the parcel, which is off Avery, it's between Averyville and.
Yeah, I've actually walked the parcel with the
Yeah.
It was a very wonderful man, so thank you. But I would say that it's the APA that's more restricted there than town zoning.
Okay.
But the only thing when I first saw that you would talk to the APA, the only thing I'll say is that APA does have an affordable housing bill. So you shouldn't let that hamlet line impact where you're designing, because the APA most likely would be, if you went through the process, there was gonna be affordable housing, they could move that line.
Gotcha.
Or, accommodate something. I think they're gonna be very willing for it.
Yeah.
So just to make sure everybody in the audience can sort of see what we're talking about here, I'm just going to jump back really quickly to the illustration here of the, let me just jump to the opportunity. Oh, where did it go?
And technically, the APA, Susan knows what I'm talking about. The APA housing bill that was 8 or 10 years old probably, and it's never been triggered. But to trigger it, you have to be within 3 miles of the hamlet. You essentially get a density bonus for not being on hamlet. So is this moderate intensity? The yellow, Caitlin, do you know?
I do not know.
I would guess it's moderate intensity. So you can get a density bonus. So whatever moderate intensity is 20 units per acre or 20 acres per unit, then you get a density bonus to have a certain to go up the number of units as long as they're affordable. And that affordable housing provision actually has this element of like in perpetuity, exactly like what your goal is here.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. You know, there was a lot of information thrown out when I spoke with the town and I spoke with the APA, and it was really, there was so much. I trust in the process for all the information to come out. So thank you.
So the hamlet zoning that's being discussed is the red portion of the property here, just for those who may not be as familiar with that term. And there is a small wetland area there that would need a buffer around it, a wetland buffer. Otherwise, a lot of this hamlet area is zoned already for development. And what I'm hearing is that that line might not need to be held too hard in terms of where the development potential is for the property. Just to restate that for everybody.
In your experience, is for something for this size of available land, you know, if they're at 40 to 60 units, is that what makes it doable? Is it, could you have the same amount of available land and have something doable where there's 8 to 10 units?
I mean, this is such an unusual case. I mean, I don't know about you, Catherine. I don't know of a massive land donation as an example, which is going to really affect the finances. So the costs will be, you know, sorting out these permits, et cetera. That's a fair amount of staff time, but also the construction, and those numbers are changing by the day. So it's very hard to anticipate what will come out of this, given those constraints and differences.
Yeah, and I was going to say, no matter what the steering committee comes up with a project scope, you know, the finances will always be, you know, something that we are cross-checking and double-checking and making sure that the project scope as defined by the steering committee stays affordable, meets these community needs, you know, sort of tries to form as many affordable units as possible, but might also have some integrative approaches. And so it's hard to say exactly how many, exactly what numbers we're looking at until we get to that point with the steering committee. And I think a big underscore that I want to make is that, you know, these learning group sessions are for everybody who's going to play a support role in advisory capacity of this steering committee, and primarily for those prospective resident owners who are going to live and co-design this business building enterprise and cooperative property management company. And that's what we're here to do, is support and guide, support partners in finding a role in a place around this work, and fundamentally support those future residents in really having the opportunity to name what's needed and have some support in building it.
I think what would be helpful to me, and I've done some research myself, but all the examples that you gave of different types of cooperatives, if we're going to have these slides, I'm guessing we're going to have these slides to go in and look at those and see and just dig into all those different types of things, because you know, there are some that are successful, there are some that haven't gotten off the ground, and I know I'm going to do some more digging that way, and I appreciate those examples.
Happy to provide them. I mean, I can give one example. In Massachusetts, our team works with the manufactured housing communities, helping residents buy out their properties and run them as cooperatives. And CDI has assisted in converting 15% of the total marketplace, which is, I think we're at 4,500 units at this point. None of them have failed, as in none of them have defaulted or have been late in their mortgages. There's certainly always ongoing challenges with governance because, you know, these are humans. But it's a strong model, and there are a number of strong models out there.
Would it remain one tax parcel or would it be subdivided?
It could go either way. In some of the models that we looked at, there are subdivisions. We have had some conversations about the ability for this parcel to be subdivided already, just heading into forming this steering committee. And, you know, we're really thinking about if it were subdivided, what would be the real specific purpose for that? Like with the Soul Fire Farm example, there is a designation between a common area for the community and the residential zones in an effort to create deeper privacy, to have those commons be a place where the whole community can use, but also be a place where it's not going to interfere with those who actually live there and have their livelihood there. And so subdivision can be used strategically, but it doesn't have to be used. Permanent real estate housing models don't necessarily deal with subdivisions and limited equity as well. So, you know, if it serves a purpose, then subdivision is something that can be looked at, but it's not something that's going to be necessary per se.
I remember who was asking about what it's the yellow part zone, that's rural use is the APA.
Do co-ops allow for an age requirement? Are there some co-ops that are, 55 and older or whatever?
There can be. I haven't seen that a lot in housing co-ops, honestly, because that might be a factor that sort of pushes against that, voluntary open membership criteria, which, sort of says like only if you're of a certain age. But I do think that, there could be portions within a development that maybe specified that to ensure that a certain number of residents of a certain need bracket had a unique membership group, and therefore a specific number of residencies that that group would have access to, for instance. And so that could be seen in a cooperative as the formation of a subclass of members, or a unique membership class that participates uniquely in the co-op. I have not personally seen any 65 plus co-ops myself, but Margaret, I wonder, have you seen any precedent of that?
I haven't, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. It's just, as Catherine says, it's I understand that in suburban towns that don't want to, bring more children to town, and I live in one, the pressure for 55 plus developments is pretty huge. But I have not seen that in the co-op world specifically. I've seen it a lot more in town governments as they designate, new developments.
And another point I wanted to lift also is just about the foundations of this project, and also the donors, which definitely come from conversations around workforce housing needs. And so some of the needs that have already been identified in the community as part of some needs assessment work that ANCA has done have expressed that there is, within a rich tourist economy area, there is a need for workforce housing as well. And so that's something I think to keep in mind. But again, back to the whole sort of disaggregation of membership classes within a co-op and taking a multi-stakeholder membership approach, that's something we do commonly in all sectors, and is certainly a creative pathway that we could explore to ensure that different subgroups of membership have their unique needs met in unique ways through the co-op. Great question. All right, so we're going to have a little bit more time to unpack some questions later, so keep your questions in mind. I wanted to just quickly jump ahead to why a steering committee? So you've heard me sort of articulate this concept of learning group turns into steering committee turns into founding membership, board of directors, and so on. So I wanted to just take a little bit of time to unpack that a bit more. When we think of a cooperative, we think of the fundamental key to success is the building of an ownership culture, which is why we need the members, the prospective members, and those founding board members to meet us early in the process to really take ownership of the vision early on. And the steering committee walks hand in hand with partners and advisors to launch this co-op. And so typically speaking, we need a group that's really going to walk the trail with us. And as we sort of guide the way to build the shared collective vision and figure out what a membership structure is going to be that best meets community needs. So that's what we're going for here. We'll have several learning group sessions to just talk about the complexities of co-ops, how they work, look at some of the precedent as we've started to do before we anticipate anybody having enough knowledge or understanding of the scope at hand to commit actively as a steering committee participant. So there's no expectation that anybody's going to sign up without knowing some information first about what a co-op actually is and how it functions. And then we'll head into step number 1, which will be after learning group sessions are done, form that steering committee and build that shared vision and set of goals in alignment with all the other information that we have at hand, including the needs assessment. Then once the steering committee is formed, we'll head into a process of exploring the cooperative development itself, which starts with the explore phase. Here you can see we explore the pre-feasibility of the ideas generated from a financial perspective, how they fit into a pro forma, where are there some efficiencies, where is money being lost. We share values, so make sure that the founding membership of residents is really having the opportunity to share individual and community values in a way that generates that sense of ownership from the very beginning. That's very important in a co-op. And, continue on with our learning group process. After the explore phase is done, we will jump into the assess phase, which is basically where the steering committee firmly commits. We have identified, again, that sort of like 7 to 12 community members who are really feeling entrepreneurial and really want to show some leadership in the process and also influence the process in a way that is for and by those future residents. We will do a series of trainings with that steering committee, very focused, diving way more deeply into governance, financials, culture of the co-op, management of the co-op, and basically looking at the business model of the property management company. So we'll dig into the market research and the feasibility that's required based on what the steering committee articulates is the goal. And then we'll support the development of a financial pro forma for the project, for the build, as well as for any odds and ends pieces that may emerge. At that point, we'll head into the structure phase, which is all about really solidifying that company itself, the articles of incorporation, the bylaws, really nailing that business plan to the wall in a finished draft. Then we'll head into implementation, which will be probably quite a long process of building out the site itself, planning the site, architects, developers, fundraising, getting licenses and permits, and the works. And then the sustain phase, which is one of the most important pieces. CDI will be there to support those those residential members as they embark on the journey of their first several years, collectively owning and operating a massive project. Internal systems of management. We have a permanent real estate that's just in this implement phase right now in Massachusetts, dealing with the meeting setups, how we do the meetings, what the roles of the board is compared to the roles of the entire membership body, compared to the roles of the hired managers of the property management team, as well as financial systems of record keeping, and allocation distributions and so on. So there's a lot of pieces that go into it, which is why we always start with learning and really front load this idea that there's a lot to learn before anybody can really take the leap and commit to being part of a steering committee long term.
And I would just add that this list seems sequential and helpful, but also a bit overwhelming. And the groups that we work with, most of whom have no experience in starting a business or in buying a house or in building a house. So this seems like a lot, but it's amazing to see groups come together, get excited, bring all their skills to bear and get it done.
And not alone. I think it's a really important point. So steering committees often form advisory councils that are teams of community advisors that support and supplement information and knowledge in a way that might be a non-voting capacity, but will still influence and support the project. So next steps, what does learning look like moving forward? We are basically positioned to continue these learning group sessions as long as we need to feel confidence and comfort in this approach, get enough residents interested in becoming resident owners of a project, get that steering committee together, recruit additional advisors to support and supplement the steering committee. And we encourage everybody to sign up and on the sign up sheets and name specifically, are you more of an advisor to the project? Are you going to become a resident member? Are you just interested in learning for now? To really help us understand who's at the table and other recruitment needs that we may need to employ to really solidify those learners together as steering committee members moving forward. So yeah, we encourage everybody who hasn't signed up yet to sign up. And with that, I want to turn the floor back over to Q&A. So sure, there's lots of questions, lots of answers to also come. And yeah, we'd like to hear more from you about what's burning on your mind now, or even some information about how you might see yourself in the project.
So my question would be, and I understand that there's a myriad of variables that could affect this. What's the timeline between now and, handing over the keys to the new residents?
Yes, yeah, and there are myriad variables, but we have sort of a benchmark right now is that we have the MIT graduate students ready to support the design charrette this winter, this January. And so that is one benchmark in the process. We hope to do learning group sessions through the fall, and with the goal of forming a steering committee on time to have the steering committee fully participate in these learning group sessions. In these design charrette sessions. And those sessions will be, I think, critical in the visioning of what the build out could look like, and also bring in some of the energy and creative spirit of the future residents themselves and a homeowner, a true home owning capacity, you wanting to be involved in the design of your future dwelling. Otherwise, these things will take a lot of time. And so we have this wonderful opportunity. Those who are investing in terms of donated property are comfortable with it being an exploratory process that supports the community in deriving solutions. And with that, we can take the time that it takes to design, develop, and build out this project. So I would say there's no really hard deadline other than that design charrette goal. I would also say that another deadline you could sort of think of is that if we can get a pro forma done within the first year for the project scope, then we can start planning the build maybe in year 2 and year 3, and think of it in terms of a general broad 3-year scope, starting from the learning group sessions. But it could go much quicker than that, depending on how well these learning group sessions go. And it could move more slowly than that as well. So we move at the pace of the group. We move at the pace of full ideation. We move at the pace of sound financial analysis. And we move at the pace of, when people can meet.
I just want to thank you for boiling this down into an approachable, what seems overwhelming to me, but just some approachable steps. You guys are doing a fantastic job with that. One thought I have as a Lake Placid resident is that we're a tourism industry. People are flat out because it's August. A lot of people aren't here who might be really interested in this. And we got this flyer, out to the school district and a whole bunch of community groups, but will there be another session like this? I know you're gonna have the recording. Will there be another session, an introductory 101 section?
So the plan is, so if you have friends who couldn't be here today and wanted to, and we know it's in the middle of the day, in the middle of summer, like it's crazy, right? So I'm glad you're all here. I'm surprised you're all here. But we're gonna record this session, and then we're gonna do a live Q&A on virtually on Thursday, September 8th at 7 p.m. So way in the evening, so somebody can do that. Then we're going to do 2 more of these learning sessions, and it'll be almost the same information, but a little bit less introductory, a little deeper. And then the next one will be almost all the same information, and then a little bit deeper into the next thing. So each of them, if somebody shows up to the next one, they won't be out over their skis. We'll starting kind of from scratch again with most of this information, and then digging a little bit deeper. Thank you.
I have a question. If there's room for participation for someone who will not be a future resident owner. We don't live in Lake Placid. We live in the Champlain Valley. I'm interested in this concept for a project there, probably on a smaller scale because of that rural community life, but would like to learn what everyone's going through in this process. So it could be modeled, maybe scaled down in another community.
Yeah, I think that, what I would recommend to you is keep coming to the learning group sessions. It takes a little bit of time maybe to like completely see how this all works. And then when it comes time for you to, apply some of these concepts in your community outside of this project, we can talk individually and independently about your ideas and your scope and a steering committee you might be able to form in your own community. So I would say, please, come back to the learning group sessions, tell others about them, and also bear in mind that once the steering committee forms, it will be very focused on this particular parcel and project. But that doesn't mean that we can't also be available to support another steering committee somewhere else.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And thank you so much, everybody from the CDI team, to be talking about this with us and bringing all of your expertise and kindness into our area. Thank you so much.